Welcome to Sri Jai Bansal ji. Just a little bit bio of him, and he is affiliated with VHP, but the detailed bio that follows it like he's a doctorate and is a scientist turned writer, community leader, and keen student of Indian civilization history. He has written extensively on the subject and given talks on the international platforms, most recently at the G20, which was pretty much discussed all globally. And he was one of the speakers for the Interfaith Forum in September 2022. What a great accomplishment by Dr. Jai Bansal ji. We congratulate him, and he will be with us today. And he retired as a chief scientist officer from the major petrochemical company in 2014. He subsequently served as a distinguished fellow at Argonne National Lab in Chicago for 4 years, as well as an advisor to the US Department of Energy. He is currently devoting his entire time to the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, where he is currently serving as a vice president of education as well as the member of its governing council and executive board. Uh, Welcome, Jai Bansal ji.
Thank you.
We are delighted to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much. And a very warm greetings to all your viewers.
Thank you, sir. Sir, first of all, I would like to ask you with a very simple question that the subject you gave me, the quest for civilization identity, what it means for.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a very good leading question, Mananji. I think if you put my presentation on the screen, we will talk about why what this means and why I joined this quest for personal identity. This is it. Yeah, as we will talk through the presentation. Even though the title says "Quest for Civilizational Identity and a Personal Journey," yes, it is part of my life story. But as we go into the presentation, I think your audience will find that it is not just my personal story, it's the story of a lot of people like me who were the pioneers who came in the 60s and 70s and for education, and then they stayed here. So with that, if we could go to the next slide.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I was just curious to know the title of today's talk. But before we go to the slide, I would like to ask you that I see your professional background is a research scientist and technology leader. You have worked all your professional life in the field of major petrochemical company, yet you have written a book about Hindu Dharma in America, and you give a lot of talks on Bharat civilization history. Am I right, sir?
Absolutely.
How did that happen? How did you develop the interest in civilization history, and what did you do again the knowledge to able to give the talk on this kind of subject, sir? You are a scientist, and this is little bit a totally different subject.
You're absolutely right, Mananji. As you know, I'm a scientist, and I've spent all my life working as a scientist in in the corporate life. But this became necessary, and as we look at, in fact, as you look at my next slide, it will become obvious why I felt it was necessary for me to get into this area. So. I came here from Bharat in 1968.
Okay.
I had just finished my bachelor's degree in engineering, and I got fellowship in Canada at University of Waterloo in Canada to do masters and then later on PhD in chemical engineering. But you see, I was just 21 at that point. and all my life, of course, I had lived in Bharat. But all of a sudden, at the age of 21, I was thrown into a culture that was very different from our own culture. And suddenly, uh, I was faced with a lot of questions that I never had to face when I was in Bharat. In Bharat, I'm a Hindu. There are a lot of Hindus there. No one questions your identity. No one questions, who you are, yeah, and what you believe in and all that. But all of a sudden, being put in a position where I was in a foreign land, in a foreign culture, and I had to all of a sudden think of, and answer questions like, who exactly am I? What do I believe in? Because, the people around me didn't believe in exactly what I thought I believed in. And then things like, what exactly is my cultural heritage? What are my ethics? What are my values? And, how is my social structure different from the social structure that I see in the country that I had come to? Customs were different. So, way of all kinds of things, the food, dress, all sorts of things were, all of a sudden for me different than the culture that I had come from. So, and then there was this bigger question, what is our contribution to the world? When I look at the Western world, and you see all sorts of wonderful contributions being made in terms of science, technology, arts, and so on and so forth. I did not know what our contribution was, and how does it compare with the other societies. So these all these questions were all of a sudden haunting me. The other thing was, there were always questions being asked. India is so poor. Literacy rate is very low. Why is that? And people were asking questions about beggars, starving children. All sorts of questions like that. And I bet I was not the only one who was being asked these questions. A lot of us, who came from Bharat at relatively young age, been asked and faced with these questions. Sometimes these questions are just pure curiosity questions, but sometimes they're also more than curiosity. They want to put you down. So this was the kind of environment that I was facing at a very young age of 21. Next slide, please. Um, and I did not really have very good answers to many of these questions. Then, in my own mind, I was dealing with a lot of conflicts. For example, I had just come from India, from Bharat, and I know that there was a lot of poverty all around us, particularly in 1960s when I came, and a lot of the everyday necessities were in short supply. There was rationing of even food grain and things like that at that time. And of course, professional jobs were very few. And in fact, part of the reason I came out of India was because job situation was not that great. Uh, the other thing was, when you talk about, any good quality product, it meant it had to be imported. And Indian stuff was not considered, very desirable. And being a scientist, or being, have with engineering background, I know that all the scientific discoveries that I had heard about and learned about were done by others. They were attributed to others. Newton, Leibniz, this, that, and the next thing. And all the college textbooks that I was taught from were also authored not by Indians, by they were authored by foreigners. And if you talk about higher education, it always meant that you had to go outside of India to get it. So there was all this going on, and yet growing up, I heard all these narratives from our own teachers, that India was Jagat Guru and India was Sone ki Chidiya, the golden sparrow. So look, those two images were very conflicting. It didn't make sense. On the one hand, I see poverty. On the other hand, we talk about Sone ki Chidiya. How does it?
Yeah.
So, so this conflict plus all the questions that I was facing all around me, it really started me on this lifelong journey to find out who I was, what my heritage was, where I came from, what I stood for. Next one, please. So, so this really got me started on what I consider a bit of self-discovery, but also discovery of our history, our civilization, our culture, etc. And I had to spend a lot of time in libraries, going through books, journals, and all sorts of literature. And the first piece of document that you come across when you go down this path is the book that Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador, wrote called the Indica. But then the next one that you come across, or I came across. No, sorry. Let's go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah. So the next piece of document that you or reference that you come across is by this fellow Pliny the Elder. He was an author and a general, around the turn of the millennia, around a very early part of the current era. And what he says is very interesting. He says Roman women are too fond of Indian luxury goods. And then he says India is a sink for the world's gold. And then another statement he made was that in no year does India absorb less than 50 million sesterces of our empire's wealth. Now, I don't know this unit of money, how big or how small it is, but the fact that this fellow is very concerned about the amount of money that is, the amount of money and gold that's going out of Rome into Indian hands, is an interesting piece of information.
Yeah.
And then, you read about this Roman emperor, Vespasian. He tried to introduce a partial ban on Indian goods,
At
but
that
he
time.
but he had to withdraw because there was just too much demand, and Roman people just forced him to withdraw. So why would you try to put a ban on a particular trade if you were dealing with a weak partner? Yeah. So this told me right away that at this point in time, Bharat must have been commercially and financially a very strong nation. If a Roman emperor is trying to put a stop on your commerce, it means we were very powerful at that point commercially.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Uh, yes, here. And then, of course, a lot of time has passed now. We're fast forwarding to the 15th century, but in between, a lot of things have happened. You have the Islamic invaders come from all over the place and looted. You hear stories about Mahmud Ghaznavi and all that stuff. But let's focus on the 15th century now. Here you hear about Columbus. Here's a fellow. He's Italian. He goes. He's very anxious to find a sea route to India, and he goes to Portugal. Portuguese king refuses him any support. Then he goes to Spain, and he finally the Spanish queen, gives him all the resources to launch this journey to find India, a sea route to India. Why would she do that? What is the attraction that causes her to spend money from her treasure on a journey that has no value? So
Yeah.
there must have been some value in investing in this journey. And then, of course, we know what happened. He obviously did not find Bharat. He found America, and that's another story. But then, a few years later, Vasco da Gama from Portugal, he managed to find his way to Calicut, to the west coast of Bharat, and we know the story. So the question is, why are these Europeans who are supposed to be rich? Everyone says Europe was rich and all that. Why are they so desperately looking for sea route to Bharat? Next slide, please. And the answer lies actually in the history and geography. So this is the map of this Anatolia. If I could put my cursor here, this is Anatolia. This actually is the old name for Turkey. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And these are Baltic nations, and then of course Western Europe, Italy here, and all that. But you see this little point here. This is this is the Bosphorus Sea. So this was actually the land route for trade from China and India into the Western world.
Oh.
Okay, now what happened in 1453, the Ottoman Empire captured this land route. So they basically took over Constantinople, and they closed off the land route for trade from Bharat and China to the Western world. And so they put heavy taxes on it, which means European, those who wanted this product from Bharat, whatever product it was, it became very expensive for them. So they wanted to avoid the land route, so they started looking for the sea route to Bharat. So you see, what this means is, forget about Pliny's and the Roman Empire. We're talking about now 15th century. The trade with India is so important that they are willing to spend a lot of money to find sea route to India.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So that again means even in the 15th century, India was commercially very strong nation. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very recent study uh, done in 2004 by a fellow named Angus Madison. He was a researcher, I think, at Columbia, and he did this big study on behalf of the World Bank.
Oh.
And what he shows is, he looks at the GDP of various countries in the world at different times. Now, I'm not sure how he does these estimates, but if he's doing it for World Bank, I take his study at face value. And what he showed was actually very, very shocking to me. He shows that at year zero, the the GDP of India represented one third of the world GDP at that time, and Europe was only 10%.
Yeah.
As time went on, okay, the GDP was, the other countries were picking up trade, so the GDP went down slightly. But even in the 16th century, the GDP the contribution of India was as high as about 25%
Yeah.
of the world. So India was in the 16th century one fourth of the world economy.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that.
Yep.
Okay, even USA today, is the richest, even though it's the richest country in the world, still is not 25% of, it's roughly 25% of world economy. So at that time in the 16th century, India's economy was, equivalent to that of the US economy of today. All right. So this tells me that India truly was a rich country for a very long period of time.
सोने की चिड़िया.
Only India.
Yeah.
Exactly. Excuse me. Uh, Now, if we can go to the next slide, please. Um, Now let's look at some other things now. We just looked at the economic side, but now let's look at the knowledge side. So we know that a number of Chinese travelers came to Bharat over different periods of time. Fahian came in the fourth century. Hyun Song came in the sixth, seventh century. I think he was in Bharat from 630 to 645, and then there are many other sources. But let's just look at what Hyun Song has written. He's written great details about what Bharat looked like at that time, what different universities looked like. He had come as a student, as a matter of fact. He wanted to study at Nalanda. Now, he says Nalanda University had 10,000 students, 100 lecture rooms, great libraries, six immense blocks of dormitories, 4 stories high. And then he talks about the admission rate. He says, of those from abroad who wished to enter the school, only 2 or 3 out of 10 succeeded. So the acceptance rate at Nalanda was 20 to 30% of those who applied.
So at that time also entrance exams were there, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could, you had to qualify to, this was a great university. You had to be qualified to be taught by these great teachers. But it also means, you see, if people are coming from, all over the world, particularly China and Southeast Asia, at great cost and great risk to their lives, they come to Bharat to study, and they don't get admitted to some of these great schools. Where do they go? So other schools came up. So there were a lot of universities like that. Nalanda was probably one of the best. Takshila, Nalanda, etc., were one of the biggest. But there were other schools came up because they had, these students had to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So this tells you that the education level, at in the seventh century, was at a very high level in Bharat. Now, Uh, now we come to the 20th century. Here's Paul Monroe. He's written this book called The Encyclopedia of Education in 1919, and he says this he's obviously part of the British Empire, but he says this: the great library of Nalanda was so huge that it was reported to have housed 9 million original manuscripts. Now, of course, let's realize that Nalanda library had already been destroyed by Bakhtiar Khilji in the 13th century. So he's using some other sources to for this information, and he's quoting Tibetan sources for this thing. But the point is that here are historians and travelers talking about how great the education system was at one point in Bharat. Let's look at some other pieces of evidence. Next slide, please. So we know that there are remains of many universities all over Bharat even today. Takshila University, it started in 17th century before the current era. It's in Punjab. Of course, it was destroyed by the Huns. Then, of course, we just talked about Nalanda in Bihar. There is a Pushpagiri University in Bihar. Sharda Peeth in Kashmir. It's now in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And then you have universities in Gujarat and Odisha and all over the place. Bihar had many because this is the old Magda Empire. Uh,
Hmm.
but there were universities, dozens of universities all over the country. So if obviously these universities are imparting very important high quality knowledge. Well, unfortunately, they were destroyed by the invaders, but nevertheless, at one point, these universities must have been flourishing.
Yeah.
Uh, Next slide, please. Okay, now we look at something very interesting. So there is a book by a fellow called Dharmpal. He wrote this book in 1983, called The Beautiful Tree. So what he did was he collected, the reports from the British period, written by the British, people themselves. These are reports by the governors and education, people in, colonial India, and these are reports that they are writing about the local conditions and sending it to the British Parliament. Okay, so these are the reports written by British officers for the benefit of the government in England. So, according to these reports, this is a report from 1830s. According to these reports, mass education in the early 1800s was in Bharat was more advanced and more widespread in Bharat compared to England. This is British officers writing. Okay, one can go pick up the book by Dharampal and read for themselves. It's all there. It and in how was it better? In number of schools, in number of students, duration in the school, quality of teachers, breadth of subjects, financial support. And there is one other thing which I forgot to mention in this page here. The majority of the students were Shudras. Majority of the students were, what we today, or call scheduled caste or Shudras. Okay, next slide, please. And here are some reports that Dharampal has actually collected. So here is a report, and this book is available even today by a fellow named William Adams, and he says there existed about 100,000 village schools in Bengal and Bihar around 1830s. And then you have Thomas Monroe. He says every village had a school. Then we have this fellow Gottlieb Wilhelm Leitner. Also, he's writing somewhere around the 1840 time frame, or sorry, 1815. He says the spread of education in the Punjab around 1850 was of similar extent. So here are British officers talking about how good the education was in Bharat, in various parts of Bharat, in 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. Okay, and they're saying it was actually better than England. Okay, next slide, please. Now, something else, very interesting piece of information. You can Google it today.
Mm-hmm.
Just say, put this string in Google or whatever your search engine is, and say how many Sanskrit manuscripts are there in the world. How many Sanskrit manuscripts are there in the world? And the top answer will come out: 30 million manuscripts are there. Now, next slide. Now, if you ask how many Greek and Latin manuscripts are there in the world, the answer comes out around 25,000.
Wow.
Okay? Greek and Latin is the language that has been used, by the West for their literature for a long time, until English became more common, or French became more common, or German became more common. So 30 million versus 25,000. That is a ratio of 1200 to 1. So India India was producing knowledge 1200 times at the 1200 times more than Europe was producing all this time.
Yeah.
Okay, this information is available to anyone today. Let's go on. Now, I did not believe in this piece of information, to be very honest. I said there must have been, someone may have just put some, goofy data in there, and but then I came across this project called Namami. It stands for the National Manuscripts Mission. This is a Government of India project, and it's available online. I have the URL on the slide. Anyone can look it up. Their job is to collect Sanskrit manuscripts and to digitize them and then eventually to interpret them. Now, if you go there, what you find is they have about 10 million manuscripts in their own hands currently. 10 million manuscripts are already in their hands,
Wow.
and out of which they have already digitized 42 lakh, which means 4.2 million
Oh,
manuscripts. Okay, I put this in the box here. You
yeah.
can,
You have
yeah,
marked it.
yeah, I marked it. So 4.2 million manuscripts have already been digitized. Now they have 10 million, and we said 30 million are total around in the world. So they're all over the place. Many of them have not been collected. Many of them are sitting in European, museums or in the hands of, European scholars who were studying them in the 18th and 19th century. So, so that 30 million data is actually very, very believable. Okay.
Okay.
Now, next slide, please. Now, the question comes up, every time you think of Sanskrit text, the question comes up, what were they writing about? Were they writing just some mantras, some shlokas for doing havans or, praising Indra or, Vayu and things like that? Well, yes, they were doing that as well, but they were doing a lot more than that. So let's look at this one simple statement. This is an English text here. It says the area of the diagonal of a rectangle produced by itself equals both the areas produced separately by its two sides. Now, anyone who has basic high school education would say that's a Pythagoras theorem.
Yeah.
A square plus b square equals c square, right?
Yep.
Well, not true. Next slide. This actually is the English translation of Bodhayan Sutra. Okay,
Hmm.
and this is written in English script, but this is the actual original Sanskrit shloka of Bodhayan that says exactly that. And this translation up there is actually translation of the shloka. Now, this was written 400 years before Pythagoras was born. Okay.
Oh,
Now, so you ask yourself, how did Pythagoras, how did it become attributed to Pythagoras? How did he come to, come by this knowledge? Next slide. So here is actually a small excerpt from a letter that President John Adams had written to Thomas Jefferson in the December 1813. He says Pythagoras passed 20 years in his travels in India. See,
oh,
Pythagoras had traveled through Egypt and all these places. He spent many years in India. He spent many years in Kerala, as a matter of fact.
wow.
And John Adams says these sublime doctrines Pythagoras learned in India.
Wow.
Okay, so I mean, this knowledge is available to anyone who just wants to go and look for it. It's very easily can be found. Next slide, please. Now, everyone knows India gave zero to the world,
Yeah.
but let's stretch our mind a little bit and see what else India gave to the world. So here's a fellow named Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta was, he lived in the, around 1476 to 550, of the current era. And he writes this, he's written many, many things, but he writes this: the starry vault is fixed. It is the earth which, moving on its own axis, seems to cause the rising and setting of the planets and the stars. So he's talking about the rotation of the earth around its axis, which causes the night and day to happen, night and day to take place. Okay.
Oh,
This is being written in the 5th century.
Yeah.
And next slide, please. What is interesting is Galileo, when he discovered the movement of the earth, now he discovered movement of the earth around the sun, but when he talked about the fact that earth actually moved in 1633, he had to spend the rest of his life under house arrest because this was against the church's, Catholic Church's doctrine. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting is in 1992, 359 years later, our Catholic Church finally agreed that poor Galileo was actually right. Okay. In 1992, they finally, issued a statement saying, yes, Galileo was right. Sorry, we just made a mistake. But we're talking about, forget about Galileo. We're talking about Aryabhatta writing of, the movement of the stars, movement of the earth in 15th century, 5th century,
Yeah.
more than 1100 years before Galileo was born. So and Copernicus and all these people were, even, around. So there was a tremendous advances in all sorts of sciences in Bharat, in astronomy, in mathematics, in, I mean, people know about Ayurveda, obviously.
Yeah.
Church, Church Samhita and Sushruta Samhita were written. I mean, um, you know, um, these are texts that were written around, I mean, a few hundred, in the BC era.
Yep.
So there was, so when we talk about Sanskrit literature, Sanskrit texts, they were not just writing mantras, to appease Indra and things like that, or how to do yajna. They were writing knowledge that we need to conduct our lives. And you see, this has to. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Um, so here we have, of course, Aryabhat gave a lot more than zero I mean, he gave zero to the world also, but he gave a lot more than zero. He was a great astronomer, as a matter of fact. But let me just give you a couple of statements here that would be interesting to a lot of people. Everyone has heard of Fibonacci numbers.
Yeah.
Fibonacci was he was an Italian mathematician. And if you know about the European numbering system, the Roman numbering system, it is so clumsy that you could not write big numbers with it. You couldn't do multiplication, division, all that stuff. It was very, very difficult. Uh, so Europeans, they came to know about the Indian numbering system through the Arabs, and because Arabs were doing trade with India, and they came to, so they in fact called it the Hinsa. The numerals were called Hinsa because then they said they came from Bharat, and Europeans picked it up. And here is Fibonacci writing in his book called Libre Abaci. He says, in this book, I have established the entire doctrine of numbers according to the method of Indians, a method I have adopted as it is the most effective. This is Fibonacci writing.
Yep.
And then we have a famous American historian, Will Durant. He says India was the motherland of much of our mathematics.
Oh.
Okay, next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over every single one of these, scientists and mathematicians, but the point is there are so many of our, you know, teachers, researchers. We call them rishis, but nevertheless, these were scientists, mathematicians, researchers who were producing tremendous amount of knowledge. We things that we learned in college, the differential calculus things, mathematical astronomy, all sorts of trigonometric, things and all that. they were already well developed in the by the 15th century, and we're talking about here Kannad in the second century BC, Pingal in the second century BC, Lala in the 8th century, Nagarjun working on metallurgy in the 10th century, and then Madhava, well, famous mathematician, Kerala School of Mathematics in the 15th century, developing algebra, trigonometry, and so many other wonderful things. So when we talk about Sanskrit literature, it's it's you know they are producing knowledge that we need to conduct our lives to 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 make to make great products. See, so this now connects back with the fact that we were a very very powerful economic country uh, for a long period of time. You cannot be economically powerful unless you have science and technology to make good products. You cannot make good products without having knowledge of how to develop products, how to make them better, so that the world will pay for it.
Yeah.
So so we were not just sonegi chidiya, but we were also jagat guru. We were producing this knowledge, and people from all over the world were coming to learn it from us, to come to our great universities at great risk to their life, as well as spending a lot of money to come to Bharat to learn these things. So all these things that we learned about India at one point having been Sonegi Chidiya and Jagat Guru seems to be true, based on all the things that I had learned over all these years. Um, so now the question is, what happened to it? As I was growing up, things were looking pretty bad. So all the knowledge had disappeared. The literacy rate when I was growing up was, in the 12-15% around the country, and of course poverty was all over the place. So what happened? Next slide, please. So this is what happened. The chart on the left, I already showed India at one point, at the zero era was 33%, one third of the world economy, and then it was going down a little bit. But then around the 11th century, the Islamic period started, and the economy was slipping, because we were just not allowed to do things.
Oh,
But then a lot of the wealth was still staying in the country, because yeah, the Muslims, they basically took over our wealth, but nevertheless they kept it in Bharat, although they were misspending it, but nevertheless majority of that wealth stayed. However, when you look at the era from 1700 onwards, this is the British era. The wealth went from 25% to 3% when British left Bharat in 1947.
yeah.
From 25% of world's economy, we became 3% of world's economy. During this period, according to Angus Madison, the person I had mentioned before, $45 trillion had been taken out from the Indian economy by the British.
Oh,
$45 trillion. When you think, the American economy is about 20, 23, $25 trillion today. So
yep.
this is taking 2 full years. I mean, total economy of the country, of U.S. economy, twice during the
Oh,
British era, a period of about 200 years.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just imagine. So there's no wonder that we were seeing poverty all over India. Next slide. Another one before, please. Yeah. So now the destruction of intellectual wealth also took place. The destruction of our knowledge system also took place. So the first thing is we know that the Nalanda library was, burned down by this fellow Bakhtiar Khilji uh, in 1193, and this is a statement from a book by this fellow. It says the burning of the library continued for several months. The smoke from the burning manuscripts hung for days like a dark pall. So the amount of knowledge, amount of books, manuscripts that got burned was so large that the whole area was dark with smoke for many. They said it actually burned for 3 months apparently, three
Wow.
months. So there is one example of how knowledge was destroyed. But then there is another example. In Macaulay in 1835, he was he was responsible for India education system, under the British colonial rule. And this is what he said. He said a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India. So he was starting to put down, starting to, you know, uh, make the Indian literature look like it was worth nothing to the Indian mind, to the Western world as well as Indian mind. And he was responsible for introducing the English education system in India. And of course, what he did was with the India, English education system, the grants, because English education was required for good jobs, people would not go to Indian schools. They would go to the English schools. And of course, all the British money was grants were being given to the English education, none to the Indian education system. The Indian education system suffered a great deal. And basically, all the gurukuls, all these schools, that we talked about earlier, they had to close down because students were not there, money was not there, there was just no sponsorship. And then, you have people like James Mill writing history of British India in 1819, talking about how Hindus are barbaric, how they're savages, they're wild, all kinds of insulting things like that. And they're dark, and they're engulfed in darkness and confusion, and hardly different from monkeys. So this, it was a way to colonize Indian mind. So Indians started thinking that their knowledge system, whatever they stood for, was worth nothing, and they had to really eat, drink, rest, behave, and like the British, like the Europeans. So they abandoned the Indian way of doing things, Indian system of doing things, and became sort of you know uh, white men, or white men in brown skin. Okay, and unfortunately, that mental colonization continues in the intellectual class in India even today.
So Shashi Tharoor has already mentioned in his book, though our ideology doesn't match to him, but some of these facts are already mentioned in his books as well.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah, he's done a very good job
Yeah.
of uh, bringing out the bad things that British colonizers did to India.
Yep.
I I think where we disagree with him is about what the Islamic invaders have done to India.
Yeah.
uh, because of his political leanings, because of where he has to fight the election from, you know, he finds it very hard to accept that Islam has done tremendous amount of harm to India. But he's perfect. I mean, intellectually, he's done a great job. Exposing the what British.
European colonial system. Yeah.
Correct. You're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right. Okay, so this is sort of this has been my personal journey to understand where I came from, what my civilization stood for, what we, what we have given to the world, and so, sitting today, I feel actually pretty good about myself that I come from a rich culture. My heritage is, very strong. It's just that there has been a dark period where our wealth was taken away and our knowledge was destroyed. And then they made fun of us by saying, oh, "Hey, look at you. You guys are poor and you guys are uneducated." You destroy our education system, you take our wealth away, and then you call us poor and uneducated. That's a wonderful thing. So let me just close my talk, Manan bhai, by going to the next slide. So a few years ago, I had been obviously learning all this all my life about what we were about, what we had given to the world. But a few years ago, I felt that I needed to write my understanding of our heritage. So I, along with Kalyan Vishwanath, who is the president of Hindu University of America,
Hmm.
um, we wrote this book called Hinduism and America: How Hindu Dharma is Transforming the West. Now, this is a lot about how spirituality has traveled from India. Hindu spirituality has traveled from India to the West, but it's also about the knowledge systems that have traveled. We talk about yoga, we talk about meditation, we talk about the medical system. We talk about lot of things in the there is a this tries to cover the history of last 200 years of Hindu thought coming to the West and how it's taken roots in the West and uh, you know how it's educating in many ways and taking roots in the West. Now I'll just give a little bit of excerpt from here that so this is thus the relationship between the West and Hindu thought continues to be trapped in a paradigm of appropriation and denigration. So we're showing in this book that a lot of our knowledge system has been taken up by the West. A lot of the inventions that have been attributed to a lot of the Western scientists and mathematicians have actually been taken from our tradition. But so they take it, but they don't credit us for it, and as a matter of fact, they insult us, they denigrate us.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, Western researchers continue to take freely from Hindu texts, which have become like an open source library for ideas, without acknowledging the source. And on the other hand, they continue to paint Hindu civilization as backward, primitive, and a threat to the world. So this has sort of been my life journey, but I have a feeling that as people hear my life story, I think they will find that their own life story, many of them will find their own life story to be very similar to mine. So that is it. But the book is available. I have the QR code here. People can scan the QR code, or they can use the tiny URL to order the book. Digital version is also available on Amazon. But it's really, even if I say so myself, it's a very delightful book. It's a coffee table book, and I think people will really enjoy looking at this book and understanding what we have contributed to the world.
So you have done a great research on that.
Maran Bhai, I spent many years, and of course, I just told you my life journey, and lot of my life journey has been about understanding what we've done for the world. So some of that has, of course, gone into the book.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, it took a lot of research to be able to write it. Yeah.
Great effort, sir. And definitely, I'm going to buy the book and go through it. And if there are some questions, I will get back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think Renuji should have some inventory of this book with
Oh,
her,
yeah.
so you should be able to
Yeah,
at
I
least.
will check it out with her as well.
Otherwise, you can get it from the VHP library. Yeah. Well, hopefully this has been an interesting
It is an
conversation.
interesting. So many facts that we were not knowing. You have just let us know that how exactly it was transformed, the history of the knowledge, and basically, the GDP thing that what you told us today. I never knew about it. That what we are and what we are now and what has happened. That was a great.
Thank you. Yeah, and what is good about the information is that this is by the Western people themselves. The all the data and knowledge is written by Western people. So they when you quote it, people cannot accuse you of being biased.
Yeah,
If an Indian writer says writes something, we were 33% of the world's GDP, they will say, oh, no, no, you're biased, you're talking nonsense. But when you have a professor from Columbia doing this study for the World Bank, and he says it, then I think that it's very difficult for them to deny it.
yep.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe you.
Yeah. All right. Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, and hopefully, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing this video
Sure,
soon.
sir. We will definitely.
Okay, and we can give maybe ourselves 2 3 weeks. I have my next present, my next talk already ready, but there's vacation time, so maybe we'll reconnect after the holiday period.
Sure, sir. Definitely.
All right. Thank you so much, and namaste.
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 Listeners and viewers, we had Jai Bansal, and I would recommend that he has given the QR code, and the link is also there how you can buy the book. The Hindus in America, right, sir?
Hinduism and America.
Hinduism and America. Definitely, I'm going to buy and read it. And if there is some question, I'm going to ask him. If you feel so, we have a scrolling thing going on. There his contact number is there. So those who wants to have any question or want to contact Jay Bansal, they can call him directly. His number is he is from New Jersey basically right now, and his contact number is 908-803-3523. Thank you, all the viewers and listeners. Thank you joining us, Jay Bansalji. Abar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Namaskar.